were three friends excited for our tour of London. James, Lisa, and I had planned this trip for months, and today was the day we finally set out. Our ride was a sleek, fuel-less car that hummed silently as it glided down the streets. The weather was pleasant, with a gentle breeze that whispered promises of adventure as dusk settled over the city. We decided to explore one of the lesser-known places in London, a hidden gem called Blackwood Manor. The manor, shrouded in mystery and shadow, was said to be haunted. We laughed off the rumors, eager for some thrills. The manor loomed before us, its silhouette dark and foreboding against the evening sky. The atmosphere grew heavier as we approached, the cheerful breeze now feeling more like a chilling caress. I glanced at my friends. James's grin faltered slightly, and Lisa's eyes darted nervously. We stepped out of the car, our footsteps echoing on the cobblestones. The only sound was the clacking of Lisa's heels, sharp and unnerving in the silence. As we neared the entrance, a dog appeared out of nowhere. It was a large black hound with eyes that glowed eerily in the dim light. It stood perfectly still, watching us with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Ignoring the uneasy feeling, we pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The interior was as gloomy as the exterior, with shadows dancing across the walls. Dust hung in the air, and the smell of decay was overwhelming. We wandered through the dark halls, our flashlight beams cutting through the thick darkness. Every creak and groan of the old manor made my heart race. Suddenly, we heard a soft whispering, as if the walls themselves were speaking. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. "Did you hear that?" James whispered, his voice trembling. Before we could answer, the dog from outside appeared again, this time inside the manor. It stood at the end of the hallway, its eyes glowing brighter, almost malevolent. It didn't bark or growl, just stared. A shadow passed behind it, a figure just barely visible in the gloom. We froze, fear gripping us. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. It was calling our names. I felt a cold hand brush against my arm, and I turned to see nothing. The shadowy figure moved closer, its form shifting and undefined. "Run," I shouted, grabbing Lisa and James. We dashed down the hallway, the dog's glowing eyes and the shadowy figure in pursuit. The manor seemed to twist and change, always leading to dead ends, doors slamming shut on their own. Panting and terrified, we burst through a door and found ourselves back outside. The night was darker than before, the breeze now a howling wind. The dog and the shadow were gone, but the sense of dread lingered. We scrambled into the car, our breaths ragged. The engine purred to life, and we sped away from Blackwood Manor, our hearts pounding. As we drove away, I glanced back. The manor stood silent and still, but in one of the upper windows, I saw the shadowy figure watching us, its form blending with the darkness. We didn't speak for a long time, each of us lost in our thoughts. The thrill we sought had turned into a nightmare, and the memory of Blackwood Manor would haunt us forever. Story 2. My family had always been deeply rooted in our Muslim faith. We lived in a small village where everyone knew each other, and traditions were cherished and upheld. Life was simple and peaceful until the night everything changed. It all started when my cousin Ahmed returned from his travels abroad. He had been studying in a distant city, delving into ancient texts and practices. When he came back, there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor, something dark and unsettling in his eyes. He spoke of things that made our elders uneasy: jinn, black magic, and even whispers of Satanism. One evening, Ahmed confided in me. "Hassan," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I've discovered things beyond our understanding, forces that can be harnessed, powers that lie dormant." I shuddered at his words. "Ahmed, you should not meddle with such things. They are forbidden for a reason." But he dismissed my concerns, the wave of his hand, his obsession blinding him to the dangers. I tried to forget our conversation, but a seed of fear had been planted in my heart. Weeks passed, and strange occurrences began to plague our village. People fell ill with no explanation, livestock died mysteriously, and a pervasive sense of dread settled over us. My family was not spared. My younger sister, Amina, started having terrifying nightmares. She spoke of a dark figure that visited her in her sleep, whispering sinister things. One night I woke to find Ahmed standing over Amina's bed, chanting in a language I didn't recognize. The room was cold, and the air was thick with an unnatural presence. My heart raced as I grabbed his arm, pulling him away from my sister. "Stop this madness, Ahmed," I shouted, my voice echoing through the house. His eyes were wild, almost unrecognizable. "You don't understand, Hassan. This is power. This is control." I pushed him out of the room, locking the door behind me. My parents, awakened by the commotion, rushed in. I told them everything, and the color drained from their faces. We knew we had to do something, but we were at a loss. The next day, we sought the counsel of Imam Rashid, a wise and learned man. He listened intently to our story, his expression grave. "Your cousin has been led astray by dark forces," he said. "We must cleanse your home and protect your family." That evening, Imam Rashid came to our house with holy water and sacred texts. He recited verses from the Quran, the air around us crackling with tension. As he prayed, Ahmed appeared, his face contorted with rage. "You cannot stop this," he hissed. "The jinn are with me. They obey me." Imam Rashid stood firm. "You are deluded, Ahmed. These forces will destroy you." A fierce wind whipped through the house, extinguishing candles and throwing objects around. Amina screamed as a shadowy figure materialized, a jinn summoned by Ahmed's dark rituals. It loomed over us, its presence suffocating. With unwavering faith, Imam Rashid continued his prayers. The jinn recoiled, its form flickering. Ahmed clutched his head, screaming in agony. The power he thought he controlled was consuming him. The battle felt like it lasted hours, but finally, the jinn vanished with a deafening roar, leaving behind a heavy silence. Ahmed collapsed, unconscious. We rushed to his side, praying he would survive. When he awoke, Ahmed was a shell of his former self. The darkness that had taken hold of him was gone, but so was his spirit. He spoke little, his eyes haunted by the horrors he had unleashed. We continued to pray for him, hoping for his recovery, but the scars of that night remained. Our village slowly returned to normal, but the memory of the jinn and the black magic lingered, a chilling reminder of the thin veil between our world and the dark forces that lurk just beyond. preferred story. It had been years since I visited my aunt's house, a sprawling old estate surrounded by dense woods. When my cousin Sarah invited me to stay for a while, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. I remembered the stories of strange occurrences that my family whispered about, but I brushed them aside as mere superstitions. As I arrived, the house loomed over me, its ancient facade casting long shadows in the late afternoon light. Sarah greeted me warmly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive. "There's something I need to show you," Sarah said as she led me to the backyard. At the edge of the property stood a large, twisted tree that seemed out of place among the other foliage. Its gnarled branches reached out like skeletal fingers, and its bark was dark and cracked. "This tree appeared a few years ago," Sarah explained. "No one knows how it got here or what kind of tree it is. Ever since it showed up, strange things have been happening." A shiver ran down my spine as I examined the tree. There was something unnerving about it, something almost alive as we stood there. A cold breeze rustled the leaves, and I could have sworn I saw a dark shadow move among the branches. That night, as I settled into the guest room, I heard whispers in the hallway. At first I thought it was Sarah talking to herself, but the voices were too numerous, too overlapping. I crept out of bed and peeked through the door. The hallway was empty, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from the direction of the mysterious tree. The next morning, Sarah looked tired, dark circles under her eyes. "Did you hear them too?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, a sense of dread settling in my stomach. We decided to investigate the tree further. As we approached it, the temperature dropped, and the air grew thick with an almost tangible darkness. Sarah hesitated but pressed on. We found strange symbols carved into the trunk, symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. "We need to get rid of it," I said, my voice trembling. Before Sarah could respond, a deep, gravelly voice echoed through the yard. "You cannot remove what does not belong to you." We spun around to see a figure emerging from the woods, a man with eyes as black as coal and a presence that radiated malevolence. It was our uncle, or at least something that looked like him. He had disappeared years ago, and his sudden return filled us with a mix of hope and fear. "What happened to you?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. Uncle stared at us with an unsettling grin. "I have seen things, learned things. This tree is a gateway, a connection to the dark forces that lie beyond our world. It grants power, but at a price." Suddenly, the ground beneath the tree began to tremble, and the dark shadow we had seen earlier emerged, taking a more defined form. It was a creature of pure darkness, eyes glowing with a sinister light. The whispers grew louder, now a cacophony of voices urging us to join them. Uncle stretched out his hand, and the shadow creature advanced. "Join me, embrace the darkness, and you will gain unimaginable power." Sarah and I exchanged a terrified glance. We had to do something. Without thinking, I grabbed a fallen branch and swung it at the tree, aiming for the symbols carved into its bark. A blinding light erupted from the tree, and the shadow creature shrieked in agony. Uncle's grin faltered, replaced by a look of pure rage. "You fools, you cannot destroy it." But we pressed on, hitting the tree again and again. The light grew brighter, enveloping us. The creature dissolved into nothingness, and Uncle let out a final, ear-piercing scream before collapsing to the ground. When the light faded, the tree was gone, and the oppressive darkness had lifted. We stood there in stunned silence, trying to comprehend what had just happened. "Is it over?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "I think so," I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure. The house felt lighter, and the whispers had ceased, but the memory of the dark shadow and Uncle's malevolent grin would haunt us forever. We buried Uncle near the edge of the woods, hoping to lay his tormented soul to rest. As we stood by his grave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us, waiting for the right moment to return. Stories 4. My Saudi friend, Omar, had always been a source of intriguing stories. We met during my studies abroad, and he often regaled me with tales of his homeland. But none of his stories captivated me as much as the one about his harrowing experience in the desert. One evening, over a cup of strong coffee, he leaned in and began to share the most chilling account I'd ever heard. I was visiting my uncle's remote desert farm. The endless dunes stretched out in every direction, with nothing but the occasional cluster of palm trees or a lone camel to break the monotony. My uncle had asked me to check on a small herd of camels that had wandered near an old bridge, said to be haunted by ancient spirits. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I saddled my camel and set out. The desert, usually scorching and unforgiving, began to cool rapidly, and an eerie silence settled over the landscape. Reaching the bridge, I tied my camel to a post and walked towards it. The structure was ancient, made of weathered stone and wood, creaking with every gust of wind. My uncle's stories of the bridge being cursed seemed far-fetched, but standing there in the dimming light, I felt an inexplicable sense of dread. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine. I turned around and saw a shadow flit across the sand. My heart pounded as I scanned the area, but there was nothing, only the vast emptiness of the desert. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it as a trick of the fading light. I checked on the camels, their large eyes reflecting the growing darkness. They seemed restless, their ears twitching as if they sensed something I couldn't. The wind picked up, carrying with it an almost inaudible whispering sound. It was then that I heard it, low and guttural, like a distant chant carried on the wind. I climbed back onto my camel, eager to leave the unsettling place. As we started back towards the farm, the whispering grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't the wind, it was something else, something that seemed to be following us. I urged my camel to go faster, the beast responding to my urgency. The sky was now deep, inky black, and the stars offered little comfort. The whispers became a cacophony surrounding us. My camel began to panic, its eyes wide with terror. I turned around and saw it, a dark, amorphous shadow moving swiftly across the sand, its shape constantly shifting. My heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The shadow was gaining on us. I spurred the camel into a full gallop, the landscape blurring as we sped through the night. But no matter how fast we went, the shadow remained close, whispering promises of doom and despair. Suddenly, my camel stumbled and I was thrown to the ground. I scrambled to my feet, the shadow now towering over me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadow enveloped me, and I felt a cold, suffocating presence seep into my very being. My vision blurred, and I collapsed, darkness consuming me. When I awoke, I was lying at the edge of the bridge. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the desert. My camel stood nearby, calm and unperturbed. I shakily got to my feet, the events of the night before flooding back. The whispers were gone, replaced by the familiar sounds of the waking desert. I returned to my uncle's farm, my mind reeling from the experience. I told him everything, and he listened with a grave expression. "The desert is full of mysteries, Omar," he said. "Some places are best left undisturbed." Omar finished his story, his eyes haunted by the memory. The room was silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. I didn't know what to say, but I could see the truth in his eyes. The desert, with all its beauty and danger, held secrets that were better left